always getting stolen. We're going to start with Jake.
I appreciate that. So I would just like to acknowledge the ASA concert was it last week or 2 weeks ago now? But anyways, what I was most impressed about beyond the children and the staff and everything was the set. That set was amazing. And so I'd just like to acknowledge all the hard work that obviously went into that.
Erin?
I wanted to say great job at ASA today. They had Ann Nesbitt, the author, and that was really, I think the kids were really into that. And the middle school jazz band. There's a whole bunch of things, so I'm going to leave some of them, but good job, everyone.
Mark?
I would kind of echo Jake's comments on the ASA concert. Also, there was a show choir performance at ASA that was very impressive. We had a couple of other concerts, at least that I saw. Middle school one for sure. It seemed like they were all getting moved around for snow, but that was also very impressive. And then last but not least, kind of acknowledge all of the administrators and teachers and staff and the students as well for what seemed to be very kind of smooth but also impactful at the same time, participation in National Walkout Day. So thank you.
Meredith?
Sure, thank you. I want to acknowledge Shauna Goodall, who is standing in tonight for helping to broadcast our meeting. So thank you, Shauna, for your help with this. Also, since we last met, our hockey team, I know that probably everyone at this point has acknowledged and heard about it, but just want to recognize formally here that they were the state champs for Class B. So that was a tremendous accomplishment. And on the same day, our high school chess team also won the state championship. And middle school and high school chess teams won the state championship. So that was a tremendous day all around. Also want to just recognize we had NHS induction last week on the same night of the K3 concert, and the induction was just so well done with nice student leadership, and Ms. Goodall at the helm kind of leading that group. It was a really nice evening. We've had a lot of concerts over the past month, and so you've recognized some of those. So we also had the All Levels Orchestra concert and the All Levels Band concert. That's probably the one you were in attendance at. In addition to the others that have been mentioned. But in conjunction with the ASA Show Choir, I just want to recognize our students who are helping to lead that, because they put in a lot of time to help lead those groups. So I want to recognize Evie Osher and Becky Tochi, am I saying that right? For their leadership with Show Choir and their dedication to really making that happen. We have teacher advisors who really are there to supervise and make sure that the students are listening and those kinds of things, but the students really run it all. So a great accomplishment for those students to do that. You mentioned the middle school jazz band. Also, our high school jazz band made it to states, and this past weekend, or 2 weekends ago, received honorable mention for both middle school and high school jazz bands. This was their first time competing at the state level, so it was a great showing for those groups to receive the high ratings they received the first time, kind of for their first foray into the state competition there. And finally, I want to acknowledge we had a group this past weekend attend a national conference in Boston, ASCD, and want to just acknowledge that group for their dedication to spend their weekend doing that. It was a great professional learning experience for them. So it was our principals, Reg Rulin, Heath Kinney, Darcy Fournier, and also teachers, Ms. Goodall, Ms. Archer, Ms. Pelletier, that's D. Pelletier, and Ms. Sear, Ms. Estes, and Ms. Strayer. So it was a really great professional learning experience for us. That is it. I'm sorry I took so long.
There was a lot to recognize. I was trying to tick off in my head. I think One Act Play hasn't been mentioned. They went to states and finished second, if I recall, with a number of individual awards. I would just like to echo appreciation to both the administration and the students for a very successful Walkout Day recognition. And in general, I'm just going to comment that a lovely theme that I've been hearing through a number of the acknowledgements tonight has been student leadership, whether it's the ASA show choir or the walkouts, or a number of other things mentioned tonight as well. And I think that's a great thing. That's, when you get right down to it, that's one of the primary functions of schools, is developing the future citizens, including the future leaders of the future. So I'm happy to see that happening and alive and well in Orono. Any acknowledgements missed?
One other, sorry. Just around the walkout, I was going to mention it in my report, but I'll just say it now. In addition to the acknowledging the students for their great leadership around this and our administration and staff, I'd like to acknowledge Orono PD for the support they gave the schools for this event. It was, very appreciated. I think made everyone feel like we were providing a really safe environment for this to take place. So appreciate their partnership and support.
And second that.
I had forgotten the orchestra concert. There's so much going on. I wanted to thank, I saw all the administrators there. It was great, of all the schools. And Mr. C, you can really see the difference as they go from elementary school to middle school to high school. It's nice to have those all-school things where you can see that change in growth.
Great. Anything else on acknowledgements? Okay. Any public comment? No public comment. We'll move on to presentations. Since this is the second meeting of the month, we just have one, the superintendent report. Meredith?
So I have two items that I want to share with you tonight. The first is, it's kind of an acknowledgement, but kind of just, I wanted to bring this to your attention. We had a surprise visit, just a random visit by the Bureau of Labor. They were just kind of making the rounds. They hadn't been our way in about 5 years and decided it was time to come and just do a compliance visit. And I guess, any employer is kind of worried when that walks through the door of, okay, what are they going to look for today? And do we have the documentation to show that we've done that? And I'm happy to tell you that we received really a glowing report from them. And really, that's a testament to our staff. There's a whole list of people that were involved specifically that day that she needed information from, and when we took the inspector to that individual, they were able to produce and show and document, and so it was really, she had lots of commendations and actually recommended that we apply for some kind of recognition that's a high-performing public workplace safety award. So I want to just mention a few individuals who were really key to that successful visit. Brent Fournier, our maintenance and facilities supervisor. Sue Bell, Ben Jacobson, our food service director. Karen Martin, our nurse. Todd Hillier, he's a science teacher, but he's our chemical safety officer. Our custodians and our food service staff, and Angie. So all of those individuals really were able to pull documents and demonstrate that they're doing what's required by law. So it was a really affirming visit to know that we're definitely staying on top of all the regs around the many requirements around workplace safety, and are able to document that. So I thought you'd like to hear that and know that that was the outcome. I emailed you on another topic around the comprehensive needs assessment and SAU consolidated plan. And I wanted to just mention it here. I kind of summarized in my email what this is about and what the time frame is for completion. And I wondered if you, if you had any questions, and secondly, I guess that we should have talked about it maybe up in the board responsibilities, but I think it's a short-term commitment. It's really just a couple of months that will wrap up in June of work. So we really need to have a board member represented on this planning team. So I'd like to see if anyone had given this thought and was willing to serve as well. So those are the two things. Do you have any questions and any volunteers?
Can you just quickly?
Summarize?
Yeah, thank you.
So the state has had in statute a requirement that districts have an SAU consolidated plan. We have one on the shelf. It's in my closet. That's where, you know, it was there when I came, and districts have to do this plan every 5 to 7 years. They need to update their plan. That's been in statute for a while. Kind of on another road has been a requirement around federal grants that you have to do kind of a needs assessment and develop goals for improvement. And so when the state rewrote their plan to the federal government for ESSA, they decided to merge these two requirements into this now SAU Consolidated Plan Comprehensive Needs Assessment. So it's basically doing a kind of a broad data collection in a number of areas, setting goals as a district with some targets that you want to try to work toward, and using those goals then when you write your federal grants to identify, you know, how your federal grants are going to help you accomplish your goals. So we need just input really to react to what we put together, to provide feedback, and we have to put together a representative group, so it'll involve teachers, administrators, board member, parent, guidance counselor, literacy coach, that kind of team. So, does that help? Okay.
Any other questions about the process or document? Now we come to the question of a volunteer. You want to give us a heads up on the amount of time you expect?
So the heavy lifting on this will be done by our staff internally in terms of pulling everything together. So really this group is just to review, react, provide feedback to that. I'm anticipating a few meetings between now and June, and probably reviewing some information in between those meetings so we come to the meetings and can be productive. So I would say, 4 to 6 hours between now and June.
And you need one board member?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody interested?
wouldn't say I'm interested, I would say I'm willing to do it with the kind of qualifier that, as I'm sure applies for you as well, at the very end of the semester, I would be highly unlikely to be able to make any meetings of finals week or around commencement, but otherwise I'd be willing to do it.
Great. If you want, Mark, I can be a backup.
I don't think anyone's going to arm wrestle you for it.
No.
If anybody wants to,
I don't, do we need a board motion to, you're calling the committee, I think, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to.
Anybody need a board motion? No?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, now we come to a big topic, budget discussion. I suggest, as usual, we move back to the table.
Yes. Those two, and I brought some other copies that I'll give you back there. Right, and I have some others to give you.
The two, I believe, did come in an email. They were in the second board packet.
Advertisement to.
The two that are being handed out now.
We've done direct kind of solicitation to students through emails. I think guidance has been trying to push it. I'm wondering if we can put this picture on Facebook and
Yeah. Yep.
it does.
nothing else.
Right. what the auditor, what Craig said when he came in, I think February or January. You can see here on this top box of the unassigned at year end that our unassigned balance has been growing over time. And really that's because we have been using or putting unassigned in our revenue picture when we build a budget, and then end up not having to use much or sometimes not having to use any of that. So over time, it either remains or grows slightly with each year's budget. You can kind of see the picture of that down below. So you can see that at the end of fiscal year FY17, we had the 1.3 million that was in our audit report that we received at the fiscal year. So you can also see kind of historically be reminded of how our use of that has shifted over the past 3 years. I think for this current fiscal year, where you see the 675, it was a consideration of the board to increase the use of the unassigned because of some one-time expenditures that were coming to the budget that year, and an anticipated drop in tuition revenue, and so increase that to help offset those impacts of the budget. Is there anything else on that, Lynn, that we talked about as to why that 675 was?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, 642 was actually built into our budget, but 675 came in the audit for the things that we assigned, projects that were in the previous year's budget that we were not finishing by June 30. We still want to use that as funds. That's kind of the way that it gets rolled in an audit. So just to be accurate, I put the full number, but when you're actually looking at our budget, it was 642 is what we built the budget on.
So when you look at the bottom there, you can kind of see how the picture, it starts with what was the difference between our expenditures from what we budgeted for expenditures and what we actually spent. And you can see that it's been pretty consistent, within that range of about $100,000 over the past few years, pretty consistently have that as a kind of balance at the end of the fiscal year. And then you can see how a revenue picture each year has shaped up. Now this is, those numbers are taking out what we had put in there for the unassigned carry forward use in that fiscal year. It's an auditing thing. Lynn and I had talked at great length about which numbers to use on here, and the audit kind of presents things in a way that's often different than the way non-accountant minds like mine think about things, but for you to be able to kind of see the thread of the net impact to the fund balance, it's important to use that number. So you can see then, like, for example, last year, we received $34,000 less in revenue than we were anticipating receiving. And that was attributable to, I think, a tuition difference, right, Lynn? A difference in the expected tuition versus the actual received tuition. And you may remember from the audit report this year, it was the $198,000 was the net impact to our fund balance. I'm using the right word, Lynn, for our fund balance. That ultimately most of that ends up in our unassigned, but it kind of takes a year to then show up in the next year's audit reports and has adjustments and such happening to it. So it might not be exactly 198,063 that ends up in our fund balance, but close to it.
This revenue number looks like it must have had the carry forward included as a revenue,
It was it was our budgeted minus our actual.
because the expenditure balance plus the carry forward, plus minus the carry forward, plus the revenue was that. So, yeah, okay.
That's right.
I wasn't following, so.
This minus this plus this is equal to this.
Yes.
Yeah.
everything we know right now as to where we think we might end up at the end of the year with, reasonable certainty. So, and Lynn put this together with an FY 17 comparison, so you can kind of see how it looks in comparison to, last year. So the first three lines, lines 2 through 4, show what we've been talking about, that revenue shortfall that we're projecting, based on tuition. That we've had several special ed students moving out of tuition communities. We've had quite a few students moving into Orono who were tuition students. So all this impacts, the revenue we were expecting under tuition. So you can see that projected revenue shortfall for this year. The expenditures, that's not really the new part. Lynn typically does that every year. So this next section is really the new part. So we looked at the latest February financials, the last finished financial at this point, and then looked at what we see as expected or predicted major expenditures for the remainder of this fiscal year. Sought some information from our administrators, kind of looked at warrants to put together a list, and then also did kind of just some estimating beyond that of an approximate amount per warrant that we thought would be kind of miscellaneous incidentals. And so in doing all of that, we have come up with the fact that we think that our end of year balance will be, as you see it here on line 8, which is very similar to what we saw on the last sheet of the 3-year pattern. So, it was nice to see that our end of year place is going to be approximately, in terms of expenditures, where we have been, but kind of the difference that's makes that a little maybe less favorable than normal is that revenue shortfall, because the revenue shortfall really causes us to dip below where we typically are with an end of year kind of finishing up point, which is one of the reasons we have gone ahead and enacted a budget freeze to try to preserve kind of as much fiscal strength heading into next year, because we all see that it's shaping up to be a challenging one. So I think that Lynn and I feel comfortable saying that, within 100,000, we think, this is accurate. I think it's probably going to be much closer than that, but this is the first time we've done forecasting of this nature, so that's about as close as we want to say we think we'll be. But, I think it provides us a useful kind of framework to think about when you look at the next set of lines, and looking at what the impact of that revenue shortfall will be. You can see that it means that 1.351 million in unassigned is going to drop after this fiscal year if what we're predicting we think will happen actually happens. If it,
120,000 if these numbers were.
well, we think by 86. Yeah, because because of the carry forward. So, that's the kind of impact that we think it will have. But again, these are all based on estimates. So if we're off by 50,000 one direction, that number will be 50,000 higher than that. So it just depends on where it ends up. But I don't think either of us foresee a
understanding this correctly, it looks like we basically took a third of, in 15, we basically took a third of the unassigned balance and put it towards next year's budget, right? The 945,000, and we took 300,000, right? And then we followed basically roughly a third the following year as well, and now we're looking at half, correct?
Last year was a half.
Yes, correct, yes. Now, you had mentioned, and I know Craig had mentioned before, that by letter of the law, we're only supposed to carry.
97% is supposed to go back into carry forward.
Correct.
I'm not saying we should do that.
Right.
No, I'm not saying either, no, into our
But-
knowledge, nobody's been penalized for that.
Right.
No, and what we're being told is it's not that you have to have a plan for that money. So what we've been doing, going up, what they don't wanna see is someone carrying 1.3 million and not putting anything in carry forward. We're trying to, we are showing a trend that we're going up in those numbers. As the numbers rise, we're bringing the number up. We just have to find the balance on how high do we go. I mean, we haven't used that whole amount, so we've been okay. But if we were,
You mean how much we're putting towards
how much we
budget?
wanna dump into our next budget.
Because and Brian alluded to it at the beginning, if we were to follow the letter of the law, it looks like we should only keep about 100 in there. And we're gonna have, by my calculation, 676. Which, I'm not saying I have a problem, I'm just speaking from their sake.
Except, no, we're actually gonna have 1.3 million minus 86,000. So we're looking at 1280, 1270, 1.27 million next year. If, to the extent this number is right, 1.27 million next year. Because we have significant expenses that we didn't spend.
So that $500,055 on this sheet, line 12B, cell 12B, that's the difference between our projected expenditure balance and our revenue shortfall.
Okay.
So since that 555 is less than our unassigned carry forward, we have to use some of that to not end up in the negative. So, I mean, you can look at this from many different angles, but I think this is the way that it's typically looked at. The 642 is there if we need it, and we pull it over when and if we need it. So when we get to probably that last warrant, we'll need that money from the unassigned to be able to finish the fiscal year, yeah.
I mean,
So-
another way to look at it is we only spent 86,000 of the carry forward of 642,000. So, I mean, kind of on a macro level, the way to think about this conversation is we have buffers in our budget, which responsible organization does, but we have several, right? We have a contingency, instruction and sped. Sped, we saw this year why we needed contingency, because literally 2 or 3 kids can move in or out of the town and completely change our sped budget by $100,000. Regular instruction, we've been more likely about not having to tap into that, right? But we have a buffer in regular instruction. We have a buffer, I would say, as all organizations do, spread throughout the whole budget. And in part, this is each principal being prudent and building a little bit of a buffer into their budget, but across all 600 line items, we have a buffer that looks like it's about 600,000 a year, right? And then we have a bank account. Those are the 3 buffers we have. And, I'm a fan of buffers, so I'm not necessarily, because personally where I'm gonna recommend when we get into this conversation, we think about the bank account buffer a little bit smaller, and not necessarily change the buffers. But we have 3 buffers, and those buffers have been working so well, our bank account keeps going up, and given that we're about to raise taxes by a lot, I don't think that's a good time to have our buffers continue.
Is there another buffer or about fee stabilization?
So, right, there's some reserve funds too. Yep, you're right. So there's another buffer, it's kind of a side bank account. Yep, you're right.
But you could look at it like part of our unassigned that we build into our budget is for the contingency, so part of it is kind of this. Without getting too confusing.
Yeah.
It's, and like you said, just because we put a number in there doesn't mean we're gonna use that entire amount. But it's there.
One of the reasons the buffers are important is if unexpected things happen, we cannot go over our expense number. We can't go over that year without going back to the voters. We can't just have it in the bank account just because we have it in the bank account, whatever our expense number is. We can't go over that going back to the voters, so clearly there needs to be, whatever meeting taxes buffers. It's just a question of how much and where they should be. Yeah, I think we should look at the overall picture first, and then I do think we want to talk about that.
So there's also the class size teacher loads. We should probably talk about that document before we hit the prioritized list. You think?
Yeah.
So, someone last meeting asked for us to bring back some information about, a couple things. One was around the request for an OMS, teacher or, .5 teacher. So we are bringing you that and the number of, course preparations they have, because that's a part of the context for why we are making the request. And then there was a second request to go ahead and bring kind of the K-12 teacher-student ratios, just so we have that full picture as we're making priorities and making decisions. So I asked the principals to provide this information and tried to kind of give it to you in similar frames. So you can see the ASA frames. We just did average class size because, you know, with odd numbers, you might have a couple of students difference between the different classrooms. So you can see those class sizes as you go down the list. And, you know, we know that we've been looking at enrollment throughout this year with our enrollment study. So we know we have these ups and downs, fluctuations of large bubbles and then dips and then another large bubble. So I think what you see in these numbers is you see that once again, where we have the big groups and then we have a dip and then it goes back up again. So you can see some of that in these numbers as well. One of the things that you may or may not remember back, but this fourth grade group has actually had some move-outs since we last talked about that group in the context of, I think, the enrollment study. So that's a group that has actually had a few withdrawals and changes to make that group even smaller. So you might observe that. In the middle school, you can see the ratios, and you see the bubble that we talked about, that sixth grade bubble there, that is definitely a larger group. And, you know, we have that same thing happening in the middle school. It goes up, it goes down. Fifth grade, or eighth grade kind of goes up in between those two, so it's that same trend that we, you know, have seen K through 12. And then we also included the OMS course preparations there. So we included the core area teachers only, because that's really the group that we're talking about when we're talking about this new unit, our new teacher or half teacher, half FTE. So we wanted to just kind of show you the issue that we have with preparation. So you can see that, you know, one teacher has 5 different preps, 3 teachers have 4 different preps, and so on. So that's part of the, you know, compounding the challenge of the ratio they have, particularly in 6th grade. And then you see the high school. The high school, it's different than the other two, certainly. Everywhere I've been, when we start looking at staffing and thinking about what's an adequate level of staffing, I would always make the case that high school is just a different animal. It just works differently, the courses work differently, your efficiencies with student-teacher ratios is different because of programming and, you know, what you want to offer. In a school like ours, we value offering a really diverse program. So when we put the numbers together like this, I can say it surprised me. It was interesting to kind of put it together in this framework. So you probably, if you've had a chance to look at this, you might have observed the same thing, with the number of sections that we have that are at that low range of enrollment. So that's something that I know we've been talking about. We've been talking about what we see at each level and where we see areas where there might be potential to look as we consider our budget challenges. But I guess to begin with, I just wanted to explain this document and see if you have any questions before we go back to our prioritized list.
Thank you for this work.
Can I just point out before you guys ask questions, there was an error on the kindergarten enrollment number because 2 kids were not uploaded correctly in Web School. We found that out after this was all printed. So it's 43 for kindergarten.
I'm trying to remember the transition from 5th to 6th grade. There's 3 classes in 5th grade, but in 6th grade, there's effectively 2 classes, 4 subjects at any given time.
No, we still split them up in 3s.
In 3s, okay. How many students are in the 5th grade?
Right now?
Yeah.
Total, yeah. Total, so it's 23 times moved.
Yeah, it's essentially
70, it's 69.
Okay. So the next 2 classes come,
Well, it's like 1 year that's kind of the same, and then the year after that, when that 4th grade hits middle school, it's a drop off.
and how many out of town students do we have? School?
How many tuition students? We have some, a few, not many.
You've sent some superintendents.
We have some superintendent
We have a few
agreements and
superintendents, but most of them that we had just moved.
I was gonna say it's up to 11 or 12 at one point.
Yeah, we've had a few that moved that were middle school tuition that are now in Orem. So we have, I think, only 2 tuition middle school students. They're all now.
so, one of the things that we see in the enrollment study is, and just in the enrollment numbers, that 8th grade is moving into 9th and that 5th grade is coming into 6th. We're very close to the same numbers, unless, something changes, which last summer at 5th into 6th changed quite a bit to get higher. So, I don't think they're gonna have a sense of relief next year with the matriculation that we're expecting.
But then after that, there's sort of 2 years of smaller enrollment after
Say, one of our conversations has been around how to respond to those enrollment fluctuations while building a program and curriculum design and staff kind of capacity and with curriculum at each grade level, without disrupting that by, making all these moves all the time. That's kind of our dilemma around how to respond to that fluctuation. So I think, there's probably a certain amount of fluctuation that we can just say, well, it would really making a change would disrupt things more than the value that would be added by changing things up. But there certainly is a threshold that causes you to think that, maybe disrupting the stability in an assignment of a teacher might outweigh, I'm not sure I'm saying this right, the value of, the fiscal need to be more efficient with our staffing. So we've been talking about that, and tonight is your thoughts on what you see to help give us some guidance as to what you're thinking. So I think that's where we're headed next when we start talking about priorities and where we are, so.
Aaron and Jake, do you feel like you have a sense of reps? I imagine we don't have that many.
Yeah, my, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm reading this correctly, the home as teacher preps, there, it looks like there's one teacher who has to prep for 5 different classes, right? And there's 3 for 4.
And keep in mind, they have, what, typically one planning period out of their 8-hour day weekday?
Some have a little bit more, but yeah.
One is for team
Team
planning
time,
and
Because there's so much crossover.
Yeah,
and then one is the.
so basically it means they're looking at prepare 5 lesson plans for next day. And grading and everything else, so, yeah, definitely more preps are harder. So to me, 4 or 5 preps, squeezed into this one time I had. Do you, I mean, you obviously don't have the statistics, ask for it, do you have a sense of the number of preps at the high school?
Varies. I would say that English probably has the most number of preps because of the number of electives that they
Yeah.
offer, and so I know there are a couple that have 5 or 6 different electives, but on average, probably 2 or 3 or 4. So 3 is the average.
Yeah.
3 or 4. That's typical.
I think when you have a block schedule, you're going to see more typically, especially the alternating block, learn like block at the high school level.
Only half of those are being taught the next day.
Right. But I would say for like a straight 7-period day schedule, that 3 is really probably the ceiling that you would want to have ideally in a teacher's schedule, and beyond that, I consider it to be less ideal.
The science teachers typically have 2 or 3. English teachers might have 1 to 5. Social studies could be 4 or 5. So
I mean, English,
it kind of depends on math is typically 3.
I mean, English is a bit unusual in this district,
Yeah.
we really only have freshman English, sophomore English. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's great, and I applaud the teachers, and I appreciate the teachers, and I think the students appreciate the teachers for having that diversity of courses, but it's also something that I think they.
Right. They've absolutely chosen
Does
that.
that put them in this smaller class range size? Like, are they prepping classes, that many classes that smaller class size to go with that? They correspond a little bit?
Yeah, there's a little
Yeah,
association there.
and then to couple with the number of preps, some of those preps, the ones that do have the 4s and the 5s, they do have some of those larger 6th grade classes. So you don't have a class of 13, you'll have a class of 23 kids. So the work that comes along with looking at grading papers and whatnot only makes it more content that's on top of that.
Everybody good for now? We can come back to this, once we get back to talking concrete positions, but. So those were the 2 pieces of background information we asked for, and, I found them very helpful, and I know they were not, they look like pieces of paper, but I know they were a lot of work, so I appreciate everybody doing this.
So, brought the prioritized tier 1, tier 2, low priority, other savings document, because that was a big conversation piece before. And I think that the other piece, I don't know if you have it handy, but the kind of the overview of where we are with our planned revenues, projected revenues versus budgeted expenditures, and then what that gap was. So we had talked last meeting about what our target was with that. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of new information know that we will have at least 1% savings from what we budgeted, which that equates to around $70,000, Sue said. So, we're supposed to get the final rate, they've said, by April 2nd. So,
Like, anything from 0 to 9%.
anywhere.
Insurance plans changing, so.
I don't have enough background to even venture a guess, so I would guess not 0.
You said 1% is roughly 70,000.
That's what Sue, I'll go back and check that out. But that's what I remember her
So what was
saying.
Lynn, what was our rate last year?
5.45?
Which was kind of high for.
Well,
We had 1 year over 0.
we had a couple of really low years.
Right.
So it seemed high, but it's, you know, at the ceiling of 9 is.
70 seems high
Oh,
too.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say. Sorry, I was transposing my numbers. It's 17,000.
That seems-
Yeah.
that seems-
Sorry.
I was like,
wow,
wow,
we
we
get
get
excited.
Yeah, so should I look this up?
I can see your wheels turning over there. I'm like,
Oh,
oh.
I wonder if that's a question mark.
Yeah, I know, and I could see it, and I
Yeah,
was like.
so, sorry to dash.
Because I was thinking
those.
there's no way.
Yeah.
Down 5%, we're
Okay,
gonna get.
17,800.
Oh, man.
So the
Yeah.
most it could be would be 180,000, but I don't
Right.
think it'd be that much.
Yes,
Yeah, I got something problems.
sorry. Yeah, so, that's the only new news we have.
Not going down to 5%, that's almost a quarter. Just like wait and see, that's why we, that's why we did that in the student enrollment form. There are reasons for us to hold
When
that.
is that deadline again?
It's the 6th, but they're gonna go out this week to get kind of the first round, guidance counselors, so.
Six is the deadline.
But yeah, 6th is.
In the second was a deadline for insurance, is what we know about.
That's what they told us, so I'm hoping that, they gave us kind of an outside window and they surprised us earlier, but I doesn't think so.
I don't know.
Well, the second is Monday, so.
It is, so I'm thinking they'll come in on that Friday.
I was thinking Friday.
Yeah.
The 30th or?
The
You won't
30th.
get them on the 30th.
No? They usually come out on a Friday, so I'm guessing maybe
Shauna has some insider info over there.
either the 30th or the.
It is the MEA Benefits Trust, not just our insurance. But I don't have anything. I just got them for you. Tell you.
Well, they're coming email this year.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, so we might get them, like we usually do. We usually have to wait for the mail to come.
Then I get that email.
And Shawnee gets email, but they told us this year they're sending them by email, so hopefully it'll be quicker.
So, the other thing, just to update you on this sheet, you see the UTC additional assessment, and it's still under the category of possibilities, because, the meeting was pushed once again, and so it's supposed to be Thursday of this week now, and so I still think that's a strong possibility we'll be able to get over our budget, but that's a resolution there.
I'm trying to think, this, going back to this sheet, or master position sheet, we had 703,000 of new expenses, and if we only do the hot tier 1 and tier 2, we would be saving 174. And we found out we have 17 saved in insurance, so that's about 191 off that 703. Am I doing that right?
Sorry, you said adding the 17 one?
Yeah, so I have 174 that's over here in the low priority and the
Yep.
other possible, and there's another 17 from insurance.
Right, so,
So that sounds like 191,000
yep,
in expenses we tentatively cut, assuming we don't go over to the right side. And we had $703,000 increase in expenses, so that would now be 508,000 increase in expenses. Right? Okay. And then we had another 140 in terms of tax. That was a function of the way valuations have changed and loss of personal variance and other things. So I would assume that what was 837 also went down by 191. So, math rate. So right now, we're looking at an expense increase of 508,000, which, 508,000 increase in expenses, 646,000 tax impact. Some of which is increased people's property values, which we've mostly talked about, not protecting people from the net way the town likes to look at it. Which is about 1.4 mil at the moment. So that's kind of recapping the big picture. 508,000 is so it's in the ballpark of a 4% increase. So, I'll start there. So for the board, we're assuming we chop off the right column, nothing better happens on tuition. So worst case, nothing better happens with tuition, nothing better happens on insurance. We're looking at a 4% increase in expenses, $508,000 increase in expenses. We can argue about how that tax number should be evaluated at 646,000, of which about 110,000, 140,000 people's property values going up. It's not a mill rate increase, but there's a tax dollar increase. So that might push the mill rate increase, depending on how you calculate that. Because the town and the schools don't use the same property years, we never agree on how to calculate that number. But, maybe that's looking at something like 500,000, which is actual increase in mill rate. So that's where we're at today. So I think, please jump in there, but I think what they want is directions on, revisit of the priorities, if we see priorities and a direction on how much work or still need, so we don't have any cuts on here at the moment, other than possibly UTC. I think there's a question of, do we go into cuts? We start getting, start implying that we're not going to be doing any of these priorities. And as I implied, the other number that closes that gap is the carry forward, brought out on the main panels.
Meredith, not to, I don't know how much direction you're looking for, but it seems to me like you guys have done a lot of great work. You have a plan on which direction to go in once we know the numbers we're getting. And if I'm correct, we'll have two of those big numbers by next week. So I don't think it's a lot of work for us to do once we know what we're getting. So I'm almost, my personal opinion is leaning towards let's wait until next meeting because we'll have our insurance and we'll have our enrollment. And you guys have, to your credit, have done all the back work on what we can get rid of and we have to.
Well, I guess my only concern with taking that approach at this point with where we stand is we don't know what that answer is going to be, what those two big unknowns are going to reveal. And so it seems to me that there's maybe a better than not possibility that we're going to have to go further than what's on this page right now. And if that involves some impact to staffing, there are some requirements that we have to fulfill contractually around that. For example, if we did any kind of RIF in any area where we saw that there were some ways to find efficiencies with staffing to help us get to where we needed to be. I've reviewed the information in the contract, and Brett and I talked about it today. There's some collaboration we have to do with the association to inform them that that's being contemplated, and then, the language around that.
So when is the deadline for that?
Well, if you kind of go to the end of the process to actually inform a teacher that they're being laid off, it's 90 days. But then back up from that, you have to, begin with notification, and then sitting down, offering the opportunity to meet and discuss, and then give formal notice of any decision that's been made, and then from there, kind of establish the impacted employee and.
How many
give the
days is
notice.
that all in total?
Well, it depends on how much we need to discuss, but I would think that the 90 days, we would need to give notice by, really by May, middle of May, we need to give notice. And then, so if you wait until April 10th to say, well, we're contemplating doing something, then we send a notice then, really before our next meeting, we need to have worked out, have them meet, discuss, and have any conversation around that.
I mean, the way I would look at it then is, thinking worst, let's say worst case scenario, tuition comes in even lower than what it's projected at here. Right? I mean, that's something I really think we need to focus on, not necessarily now, but long term. You get 1 year of tuition drop, maybe that's a blip, now we've got 2. And based on what we're hearing about how some of our competitors, to be honest, are really aggressively pursuing and gaining tuition students, I think we need to really have a serious look at that. But that's maybe not now, that's soon, but maybe not now. But let's say those tuition numbers come in worse than what Lynn's got there. And I know Lynn is very cautious, and I appreciate that. But let's say they come in worse than that. In that case, then I would think we have to be contemplating a lot of things, right? So, I mean, if it's just a matter of, are we contemplating? Yeah, I mean, if those numbers come in low, then yeah, we're gonna have to contemplate that.
So, we already gave the legal perspective, but it's our job as a board for the political perspective. If we end up in a very unpalatable place of having to cut existing positions, if we don't even talk about them until the 10th, and we would be voting on them on the 24th, I think 2 weeks is a very small amount of time. It might be legally allowed, but it's a very small amount of time for the affected people to absorb that information. It's a very small amount of time for their colleagues and departments and plans to absorb that information. It's a very small amount of time for the community to absorb that information.
Absolutely.
And Mark, I think, Mark and Darcy probably the only people who were here the last time budget cuts happened, or maybe you were here too, Jeff, but 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, that was a 6-month public anguish. And I don't really, I don't think that was well handled. I don't think it should be 6 months. But I'm not really sure I feel comfortable that all of our stakeholders, including the teachers and the employees who would be affected, and the community, students and parents, taking that decision in 2 weeks. It feels like it'd be a surprise. And I guess, so I totally know where you're coming from, Jake, and most of the time I'm wearing the same hat of why cause crushing grief until we have to, when there's a lot of uncertainty. But I think this is the uncomfortable place school budgets are in, because of the schedule. But tuition, the insurance can't get worse, tuition could get worse as well. Better. I think we don't have to take any decisions, but I think we should start talking, you know, if we have to cut deeper, if we have to cut another 100,000, are we chopping off all the tier 2, or are we looking at cutting some positions? And maybe having some, we're not going to, I would recommend taking decisions, but we may give the administrators some indication and feedback. Among other things, there's 3 buildings and there's less of us. And so we need to help provide some guidance along the merit about where across that spectrum they come. So I don't really want to go there, but I guess I'm going to have that. We need to start the conversation. What other people think?
I can just say that we've had a conversation around this. Probably the one that's the easiest to talk about is the instructional coach, because there's no one in that position right now. And it's hard for us to imagine a scenario where we go into staff cuts and don't, how we consider that one as something we really need to put out there for consideration and figure out another way to accomplish some portion of that without it costing 70, in the end, with benefits and all, $70,000 potentially.
I would agree.
So that's just an example of something we talked about, but after that, it gets kind of hard to get real specific about what we've talked about without it really causing some anxiety.
I mean, I would just say before for me, just speaking for me personally, before we would consider kind of the elimination of existing positions that have in them, I'd say for sure, but I'd give very strong consideration to eliminating all of the tier 2 priorities before even contemplating that. I think it was Jake, and again, this, but I do think he made the point at one of these meetings that maybe I'd be inclined to treat the golf one a little bit differently, because we promised these kids that they did certain things that we would carry through and fund a position there. And I generally like to keep promises made. It's easy when it's only $2,800. So maybe I'd look at that one differently, but I think everything else, certainly before we want to start looking at existing positions or in, I agree.
I'm going to take, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but slightly different tack. But I think a healthy organization does cut some areas and grow some areas, and I think we need to be somewhat adaptive. And just in particular, the OMS teacher, I think is something we need to look, it is a tier 2, but we need to look seriously. And it may be that there's some wins, in terms of Lisa and OMS and getting their heads together and finding some wins, but I'm probably going to argue to keep that OMS teacher for a while, and that may push other cuts. I mean, without naming positions, which I go to tonight, if we did have to cut positions, it seems fourth grade in NISA, and I don't want anybody writing down if that means the fourth grade teacher's going to cut. That's not what I'm saying at all, but that's a place where there's some spare capacity. We would need to think about how we could capture that capacity. And again, there may be creative ways where, some of that capacity at ASA helps out with some of the needs at OMS or something, and I think we have to look at 30 classes that are under 10. We'd be the first to defend small classes. This is how we have Spanish 5 and Spanish 6 and French 5 and French 6 in a small school of 300. This is how we have as many AP classes as we do. I totally would not say we should get rid of all or even half of those classes. Maybe having 16 electives or whatever it is in English, 10 electives or whatever it is in social studies is
choice we get, the more flexibility we get, the better we can do in what a bad situation is. I mean, let's hope we don't do it. I think we have to prepare for it. So the more, it's kind of strange to say, but the higher number of different unpalatable options we can get.
Target number that, I don't know, maybe that's easier if we had kind of a target number where the board would like to see, and we could put options together, and then obviously if we're in a better scenario, we're going for this number. If we have a good scenario with tuition, we know we have less cuts to make. If we are in a bad situation, we know we have more options to kind of give you, but is there a kind of a target number ballpark that we could be looking at?
What have we said that we want to have ready? I mean, maybe we show up at the next meeting and tuition and insurance went great, and we have to circulate these scenarios, but I think the admin team should come to the next board meeting with a 100 and a 200 cut scenario, and those cuts maybe a third of this, and maybe the other savings.
I think we're all agreed that kind of the low priority and the UTC stuff,
We may not have a choice in this, but we're hoping for that.
right. So, I guess that if we're gonna go with Brian's approach, then I think those numbers would have to come from tier 1, tier 2.
Tier 1, tier 2, and existing. That sound right, the right level? Anybody think we need to cut 300,000 and get him to half now?
Because I'm a little confused, so I think it's because of your adjustment that you make of the tax impact and where that's coming from. So I'm looking at the 837,095 number of the total
Yeah,
increase effect of taxes, and
but we've taken 191,000 out of that, right?
192.65 if UTC materializes that way.
Okay.
So that gets it down to 644,470.
That's the number I was saying, if we get a ballpark of where we want
So,
that number.
right, so I guess beyond what we have just calculated, how much further on that 644,470?
But out of that, Brian, aren't you backing out the tax?
I
He
personally,
is, but the town's not.
Yeah, I
the town's not, I am, the voters are gonna do whatever the voters are gonna do, so it's just gonna be different. I'd have to rerun the number, I did this with Meredith a month ago, and I forgot the exact number, but it's over 100 and less than 150,000, that is, and again, everybody's gonna do that calculation differently, because the years just don't line up. Town's gonna be doing it based on this year's assessment, which we won't even have by the time we actually do our, so we're just gonna have to pick a number, but yeah, 130,000. So, if we're only protecting from mill rate increases as opposed to property value and dollar payment increases, it's more like 500,000, which is just over a mill increase.
So we're talking about the figures that you gave, you're talking about beyond the current things you see there plus insurance.
Assuming this is
Give
going
it
on.
another 50, 100, 150, 200, like a 50,000, well, won't be quite that easy.
Yeah, I mean,
If we're using the 600,000 plus number, I mean, is 200,000 gonna be enough?
that's where I'm, yeah, that's why I think we need to be realistic tonight.
I think
So-
we probably should.
I will say, the other thing that can reduce that number is pulling out of the balance.
Yep.
Right, so, but, yeah, I think at a minimum, I would want to see $200,000 number. I hope that's not where we go. But I think we need to be prepared to have a $200,000 cut, and I'm wondering if we need to be talking about a $250,000 or $300,000.
We should do both of those as well. I mean, I know it's extra work, and I hope it's extra work that ultimately doesn't get used. Well, it's work that you do that.
So those numbers off the 640.
Off of expenses. that's not included in those numbers, insurance or tuition. Stuff that they wouldn't get there.
The unknowns, yeah. We want to talk about that unassigned number and how high we want that to go, because that will have an impact on our tax number.
It will, I think.
But we're not ready to do that yet.
We're not ready to decide. I'd be like to go around the table and hear what, first, how much are people willing to, well, let's phrase it this way, increase or carry forward. $642,000.
That's what we did last year.
That's what we did last year to impact taxes.
On
we would have-
an unassigned, end of the year balance of 1.5.
Our projection is coming into next year, we'll have, really have 1.26 million.
But last year we did 642, we did that based on.
We didn't have the 1.3 yet.
We had the 1.2.
Okay, so
We had the 1.2.
So last year we did that. So this year our projected, again, recognizing the projection. So the end of the year projection is
1.26.
1.26
No, that's the projection where we would be next year.
Basically, they're only gonna have to pull 80, what was it,
86,000.
86,000 out of that 1.3.
So that should be our bank balance on July 1st. Of course, checks go out
Approximately.
later. Plus or minus.
Plus or minus.
I signed a lot of approximate, then not to be blamed.
Well,
So we did,
not to,
so we did 642 last year. Could we do that again?
that's what we have,
That's in the budget,
642 in the
so-
budget right now.
If we want to drop taxes, we have to do it. I'm just gonna put it right out, I would be comfortable with plugging that much. I think our balance has gone up by 400,000 over the last 2 years. Taxes, and I don't think that's a helpful story. I would want to take town, quite frankly, had the same problem. They kept trying to reduce that number, but then they kept not spending the money down quite as much as the budget, and their bank balance went up for several years in a row. But I think we need to get rid of it. I don't want our bank balance to go down to certainly 300,000 or 500,000, or probably even less than, you know, 900. But we need a big enough number that that number actually goes down next year. I'm gonna say 200. Which would mean-
On top of what we're already.
So carry, yeah, the carry
So
forward.
do the
is
642 is okay.
Uh-huh.
Let's say, you know, the only, and we talked about this afternoon, and I think that is something we need to consider. I think the next year, you really feel an impact of that, the next year in your budgeting. So it's hard to back out that number once you put it in
Yeah.
there. Is, I guess, the counterpoint to that.
Yeah.
But I agree that it's hard to justify having unassigned that continues to grow and not really earnestly try to bring it down. I guess I wonder, are there other ways to bring it down? But, yeah,
That's fairly just a run by account. It's a bank account.
And
there's
that-
flexibility over.
And that would be assuming that we continue our same spending pattern. You know, if for some reason that balance is closer to 0, we spend our entire budget, then we're gonna use that entire 842 that we put in there. So I think
But
that
that hasn't happened.
it hasn't happened,
Yeah.
but that's just something,
I take a little comfort that the numbers
right, are pretty consistent.
682, 704, 601, and that matches my intuition about how organizations budget, right? Both the departments operate and the principal operate. And I have no problems with them doing that, they should do that. If they do that. So, that's a number I'm willing to bet on. But I think Meredith's point, this is basically a one-time solution.
We said that last week.
I know we did, we looked at it, we put more right into the budget, and but it hasn't hurt us either, right?
It doesn't hurt us, but I really, I'd be willing to, I mean, I'm not saying yes or no, but I'd be willing to consider that number, but at the same time, if we were to do that, I'd want to make it very clear that really this time it is a one-time solution. I mean, I know it's too early to do this now, but I want to reiterate, I want to focus very strongly on the tuition, revenue side in general, tuition in particular, going forward. I just think that trend, in 2 years, when we certainly make a trend, that's unsustainable. If that continues, then we're
which is what we did with that additional over the 642. So 642 was worked into our budget. The rest was pulled out of our net fund balance and assigned, and we were allowed to use it, but it didn't hit our revenue numbers. So when we're talking about next year, we don't have to hit 675 to cut even. We only have to hit the 642. So there are ways to assign pieces of that unassigned for budget purposes that we can use it without building it into revenue. If that makes sense.
But my main concern is reducing the tax numbers. And I, you know, and I have to worry about the tax number next year after that. But my experience has been, it is so, I mean, it is so darn unpredictable. We could have whatever, there could be a Democratic wave of a Democratic governor in the state next year, and we could be hitting the 53% next year. I'm not booking on that, but it's very hard for me to be watching more money go into that bank account, raising taxes, when my, you know, average expectation is no net change, but it could be up or down 500,000 next year. So that's where I'm, and it's very hard for me to raise taxes.
Take that money out, it's down 500,000.
Yeah.
Then we have a problem anyway, but now.
It's bigger in the sense that an extra 200,000 has to be cut next year, or spent down by the bank account next year. Right, it depends on how much you take that 500,000 versus a one-year thing. It's, I mean, we're doing, the world in which we live as school boards is extremely inconsistent. State ways, they don't, we kind of follow along afterwards. So maybe this is maybe less prudent, but it's maybe a little bit more budget for the year, and then see what happens next year. Anyway, it sounds like I'm on the high end when I say I take 100,000 out.
No, I'm not saying that I wouldn't, I wouldn't consider that, my kind of knee-jerk reaction is higher than that, but I'm not ruling that out, right?
Yep.
I'd rather, not to.
Well, when I was saying assigned too, you would pull those expenditures out of your budget, so it still would be an impact to taxes. You would pull the revenue and the expenses out, but you would assign it, and you would use that assigned money to do those.
Right.
So you would obviously pay for a teacher because that's going to be recommended, but
Right.
expenditures that are one-time things, which is kind of what we did when we got to the 642, only this would be removing expenditures and revenue out of the budget, opposed to.
So for example, we could pull the third grade Chromebooks, and instead of financing them for 3 years, we could pay for them all in one fell swoop with a allocation from unassigned specifically for that purchase. So we pull it out of the budget and
We reduce the bank account, we reduce the taxes. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then we wouldn't have next year.
Right.
We would, yeah. Yeah.
do the same thing with iPads.
Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't have a big carry forward, but on the other hand, expenses out of it, we're gonna have more one-time expenses next year. Aaron, Jake, do you have any thoughts on that number? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like it should go down, whether it's making a bunch of one-time purchases or getting something off the books, or
We could work some of those things into our the option.
I guess, yeah, I also want us to think about this in the context of the facility study. There may be some projects revealed to us that give us an opportunity to use our unassigned for some, specific allocation to needs out of that. So I think we're gonna have some other opportunities presented to us pretty quickly,
Yeah.
in that process, so.
All right, so it sounds like we've gone as far as we're gonna go on carry forwards and drawdowns. Coming back to giving data and direction. I said 50, 100, 200,
we're down to 230.
Right.
236.
70,000. Yeah, we should find out.
I was thinking there.
Yeah. So,
So there's levels, do you feel like you need more feedback about areas to look at, or is that something you think?
well, I heard you say two things, and I wonder what the pulse of the rest of the board is. I heard you, in terms of our staffing, well, I heard three things. I heard Mark speak favorably about, adding to the list, reduction of positions that aren't currently filled. And then, like, the instructional coach was, I think, the context in which you were saying that. And then, Brian, you said, kind of looking at a way to use the spare capacity at ASA, maybe to help meet the OMS, part of the OMS need. And then to look at the kind of smaller section classes and see if we can find any suggestions out of that.
There was also the cutting through
Yeah, I mean, I did say that, unfortunately, we won't have evidence to this on a lot of those until it's too late.
We are taking one later tonight, it's not. So, yeah. So is there anything else that you would say about those? I guess hearing from anyone else, or do you agree those are areas to focus in on?
I don't know much about the athletic checkbook, but I know that we've used that before for some of the sports costs. Is that applicable to some of these things related to golf and the hockey uniforms? I know these aren't huge differences, but I thought it might contribute to the overall total.
The athletic checkbook is for athletic capital improvements based on the policy.
Okay, not uniforms.
Not right.
Okay.
Traditional uniforms and salaries are considered ongoing expenses.
Okay.
Although I do look at
That
that,
makes sense.
I do look at the hockey uniforms at 4,500, and that, a lot of times 3,000 is the cutoff for capital expenses.
Right. I mean, and that would be, that's the way the policy reads. It's a
So it takes a,
board.
what's the word I want to say, motion to suspend the rules, which we have 4 votes to override that policy. So that's certainly an option.
Well, we were looking at that today, actually, in the context of some cross-country uniforms that were budgeted this year, but not ordered in the fall because of, the supplier didn't have what was needed. So they had deferred that ordering, and now we're in the freeze. So we were trying to see, are there any possibilities to augment the purchase of those through the athletic checkbook? But you said it was down to 982.
That's different than the athletic
capital.
capital improvement.
So this is just the, like, the gate receipts?
The gate receipts is the capital improvement, so in our original athletic checkbook, back when we made this policy where gate receipts had to go into the capital improvements, there was a portion that could stay in the regular athletic checkbook for improvement needs. That just hasn't been spent yet, it's just sitting there. I mean, it's been used little pieces here and there, but that's the amount that's left from the old athletic checkbook, the original old athletic checkbook before the rule change. So in the first year, 5% of all gate receipts went into the athletic checkbook as kind of a transition from how they were using it to it going into capital improvements. And then the next year, 100%, next year forward, 100% went. So that's what's left of that 5% of the first year in the original checkbook.
How much is in the capital checkbook?
There was only 982 the old, or just, we'll use that terminology.
The slush fund.
Yes.
So, we're trying to figure out this cross-country uniform issue, and now that we've seen kind of the picture, after we get through one more warrant, I think, we may feel comfortable going ahead and making that purchase with some help from the old athletic checkbook, but we'll get through one more warrant to see if the picture's shaping up like we think it is.
And there is money in their budget, as you said, it was there for that purpose. That hasn't been spent, but it 14,900 in the capital side.
Okay. I would just say I would, but I would certainly consider large uniform expenses as something. Not as a general rule, but budget straits. Anything else? All right, really faces, such a fun job.
I did.
Okay, next up we have staff resignations.
Yes, so we have had a resignation. I'll share that with you now. Have a couple of copies. If you'll pass that one down, we'll share this one. So we had a resignation. An employee informed us of her planned resignation. Nancy Connor, our Chapter 104 coordinator teacher, has informed us she plans to retire effective end of this school year. She's been a tremendous asset to really the development and growth of our Chapter 104 program. So this is one of those that I have a feeling we all want to support her and her wishes, but accept with regrets. So I bring this to you for you to consider.
So we no longer have to vote as a board, but I would just echo that definitely I take this news with a lot of regret. I wish her well, but she has added a lot of value to the district, and for a long time was the entire Chapter 104 program for this district. So any other comments? Okay.
I would agree.
Next up is school calendar approval. So you have a copy in here. Meredith, any changes from the last time we looked at it?
Well, yes, and I would say the change is that I really don't feel like we can consider this for approval tonight.
Okay.
When we set the agenda, we were scheduled to have our meeting at UTC, and since that's been pushed, we have zero feedback from that group yet. So we're really not going to be able to know the impact of that required give and take with that group. So that's news number one. But secondly, we did end up moving the, well, two things. We've restructured the forum. I want to thank Shauna for her great work on this to help us get it to format that's easier to reproduce in black and white. I like the colors, but it's just not realistic probably for everyone for us to do all that color copying. So we've just changed our kind of codes a bit at the top. But really the only change other than just the format is we moved the May early release day. I don't think we had made that change the last time we were together. I think it was Shauna again who pointed out that our plan day initially was right in the middle of AP testing time. And that's just problematic for scheduling. So we ended up moving it to the 22nd of May. It was on, I believe, the 15th. And so the week of May 6th through the 17th is exam week, or AP exam window. So we opted to move it to the 22nd so that we could kind of get it out of that week potentially of end of semester for UMaine. I think it might hit that week of end of April, early May, or it's still, you're still in session. So we thought moving it later would be more helpful than having it earlier. I think that's the only change, other than to say, the other thing is, just in looking at where we are in this year's calendar, we're at the maximum window of days that our seniors, or the minimum window that our seniors have to attend before graduation right now. So if we have another cancellation, which I'm hopeful we won't, then we would have to consider how to get an additional day in for our seniors. It's really not an issue for K through 11, we just add more days. But I think Brian had a question about, do we have enough snow days built in? The only problem is adding snow days really does not help the senior issue unless we move graduation, which I'm not sure that any of us want to do. But one thing about our calendar, if it can stay the way it is, we have positioned some days where we would have opportunity to repurpose the day for a school day if needed by moving our March day later in March, the March teacher work day. When you have it really at the beginning of March this year, we didn't know at the beginning of March just how impacted we were going to be by subsequent snow day cancellation. So having it later in March can give us more opportunity to repurpose that day if needed. I know some area districts did that who were already kind of in dire straits at that time. The other thing is having that May early release day. We could also contemplate, changing that and having some kind of makeup plan associated with adding time to the school day and using that time as well in that plan. So I'm giving you all this information, just some things that have occurred to me, just living in the calendar that we have this year, which is not too dissimilar from this one we're looking at right now.
So what drives the senior end? Because it's a couple of weeks before graduation, right?
So the last day for seniors?
Yeah.
Well, the 170 days is really the last day before they, the last school day before graduation. In terms of, actual last day with things like graduation marching practice and things like that, those really are counted as technically school days in the calendar because it's prior to graduation. So the 170 are the days you count up of school days on your calendar prior to graduation.
So, it's probably a bad idea, I'm just thinking out loud, but if we move graduation on this calendar to the 16th, we wouldn't necessarily have that problem next year, but it would end up with the possibility that the seniors would be out of school for a week before graduation happened.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't have a strong opinion on whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but I guess I'm assuming you think it's a bad idea.
Well, I think that this year we're going to come in right under the wire as long as we finish up, as I hope we will in the next few weeks. And I think we have a couple of features in next year's calendar that give us more possibilities to make up some time later in the year than we have built into this year's calendar. So I'm not really a proponent right now of changing it unless something happens at UTC and we're compelled to make some pretty significant changes to our calendar. You know, I'm comfortable trying to move forward with it as planned. I would really, you know, I think there hasn't been a year in recent times when you've had to contemplate making up days, right? But I also know that the commissioner has changed really the perspective on waiver days, and it has become, it's a lot more stringent to get a waiver of required school days without demonstrating you've made efforts to reschedule and recoup the time lost. So that is a kind of a different framework.
Okay. Yeah, like I say, I don't have a strong opinion on how to handle it, but I do a lot of climatology in my job, and nobody predicts with that much accuracy, but I do think this is the new normal. If it's a couple degrees warmer in May and we're going to be crossing the frost line all the time, and I think we're going to be looking at more snow days than we have in the past. So I just want to make sure we're kind of prepared for that. And as you say, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen another, whether you put one for K-11, but I do think we need to continue to be, sounds like we are prepared for the seniors as well with the early release in late May and some of those things. Okay. Anything else on the calendar? Nope.
I want to say I like the black and white approach. It's great. We could probably even make the gray parts lighter on there so you could see, at least on this copy, it looks like they're, you know, if we're going to have everybody just have these copies instead of doing color copies to all the parents. They're awesome.
Yes, my first round, the admin team says you got to make those grays darker, and now we need to make the grays lighter. So we're going to have to figure out what the middle point is. So, but yes, I agree that it's a little difficult to read.
Anything else? Okay, next up, Indigenous Peoples Day. We had intended to pair that with the calendar approval, but that's not going to happen. I'm going to recommend we just go ahead with this. So I'll just make the motion, and then we can have a conversation. So I would make the motion that the RSU 26 district recognize the second Tuesday in October holiday as second Monday. Sorry, thank you, as Indigenous Peoples Day. So that's my motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
I think we talked last week a bit about the rationale. It's obviously, well, you know, recognizing the European discovering North American 1400s is a bit of a sore point for the Native American population, and I would just reiterate that one of our sending schools is Indian Island, so I think that's especially important that we be perceptive and sensitive on that. As we discussed, there's no legal holiday. I guess it is embedded in one of the two contracts, the staff contract, but primarily it's just been treated kind of inconsistently across the, we don't have any official legal attachment to of a name to that day, but it does pop up on the Google Calendar. It's been popping up in some of the schools. I think ASA last year had a display celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, while our Google Calendar called it Columbus Day. So I think it would be good to give a little guidance across the district, not a heavy-handed guidance, but a little guidance to be consistent. And I think the appropriate consistent name would be Indigenous Peoples Day. Any other discussion? Well, you said you had spoken to the town about their change last year.
Right. There was some conversation at our last meeting wondering if the town had encountered any, I guess, unintended consequences or feedback on their change, and there really hasn't been. She said, I talked with Sophie Wilson, and she indicated that their collective bargaining agreements were different. They did cite Columbus Day, but that, you know, they're just going to wait and make that update in the next cycle of updating their those agreements. and that there's really no obligation to recognize any holiday. And so it is completely up to their governing body to declare the observances that they're going to have as a town. So there was really no negative effect that had in any way. So I think it gave she gave no indication that there would be anything around the corner that we should be aware of.
Any further discussion? No? Okay, all those in favor? Okay. Approval of job descriptions. So this was something in our packet. This is something we do from time to time. Do we necessarily do it annually? I don't think we have in the past. But there are a number of reasons. It has been a good process, and I know Meredith has stayed on top, and several people have spent some time and energy updating these job descriptions. And as you know, as you probably all know, these are used in advertising and hiring positions, and then they're used in communicating and evaluating performance of meeting expectations or not, as these are basically the expectations. So I will make a motion to approve the job descriptions for EdTech 1, EdTech 2, EdTech 3, custodian, food service worker, and school administrative assistant as presented to us. Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion?
Two things. As I started reading through them, I think I figured it out. CHRC, criminal history record check.
Yes.
And then the only thing which may or may not be a typo is under EdTech 1, under the performance responsibilities, it lists EdTech 2. But under 2 and 3, it lists 2 and 3. So I'm thinking that might be a...
I think you're correct.
Okay.
That should be EdTech 1, thank you.
So I would amend the motion to have that correction.
Yep.
Any other comments? Good reading, Jake.
I can just say that some of these have been updated more recently than others, we could tell, and that it's really compelled by the newly adopted collective bargaining agreement this year, that following that approval by the school board, we are supposed to review and update any job descriptions that need to be updated. So there's really, I think anything that we change really just represents the current work expectations and frameworks. There was just, in the administrative assistant, for example, some outdated language around
X machine.
Yeah, some of the technology that's changed. So like the word type and, typing purchase orders and just things that had changed, adjusted. So nothing that I think would surprise you, but I do have the markups if you're interested.
Any further discussion?
Just in nothing substantively, but just in terms of formatting under, and this is true, I think, of all the positions under performance responsibilities. Some of those sentences end with periods and some don't. So that kind of should be consistent, I think, but that's about it.
So everybody, this is the first time we've seen them, so I don't want to rush people. Everybody comfortable with taking a vote now? Okay, all those in favor? All right. Next up is policies. So we have two policies for consideration. One of them is an amendment, and one of them is a new policy, second read. So let's start with the amendment, which is JRA. So there's only two changes. We got rid of Riverside District. We would just shorten that to, we're no longer Riverside, so it's Regional School Unit 26. That was left over from the old RSU. And the main change was under directory information. Darcy brought this to our attention, that you were allowed to list a grade, but you were not allowed to list a class. And for things at the elementary school, like class lists for Valentine's or birthday parties, it was thought desirable to bring a class list. So we have added that So, I mean, backing up even higher, FERPA makes most student information confidential, and the exceptions are the things called directory information by our policy, so everything in Section A is allowed to be published. So those are the only things that are allowed to be published. Everything else is required to be need-only under FERPA. And so we just added in the third line class lists for elementary school. We didn't think there was a need for class lists at middle school or high school. And in fact, probably some reasons not to put those out since they're moving from class to class to class. But so we added class lists for elementary school was the only other change. So I will make a motion and then we can discuss. So I would make a motion to amend policy JRA as presented in this document. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? In general, it was a good discussion. We hadn't looked at this is one of the old policies hanging around from a while ago. We hadn't looked at it, but it was kind of good, I think, for everybody to look at it again. But in the end, we only decided one change was needed. Okay, any other discussion? All right, all those in favor? Okay. Next up is JLF. This one was not a required policy last year and therefore hadn't been on my radar. There was a change in law that required, it's basically required this year. I don't think there's an exact deadline. It's obviously a pretty important topic as well. This is a very substantial, we didn't have a policy in place, but it's a very substantial change from the default MSMA policy that was running around a year ago. The main thing done on this policy was there was one policy from MSMA on physical abuse and neglect and another policy from MSMA on sexual abuse. And since much of it overlaps, they were merged into one policy. This has been discussed in quite a bit of detail at policy subcommittee, I want to say 3 times, with all of the principals and Meredith and Mark and I having, and the several school counselors having quite a bit of input. This is a second read. We made a couple of changes. Probably the most notable change was under 2A, which is just at the top of the second page. We, instead of saying school employees, based on one draft of the language, you decided this longer list was a better solution. Most of the other changes are not substantial compared to what we had brought forward. I will say that you all got by email, we got feedback from the ASA school counselor that there were 2 additional concerns. We did recognize that this is a substantial policy in the policy subcommittee, and we discussed whether we're ready to vote on it. And I think the policy subcommittee feeling, and my recommendation, is that we go ahead and adopt this policy tonight, because I feel kind of exposed as a district having no policy on this topic. And the policy subcommittee will commit to visiting the 2 concerns that are brought up by the ASA school counselor. And we will probably bring this back for an amendment later in the spring. But yeah, in my opinion, the 2 changes were tweaks, and I would like to have a policy on the books ASAP. So I'm going to recommend, we can choose to do that or not, that we go ahead and adopt this tonight with a commitment that we're going to come back to those 2 issues raised and amend it over the next month or so. So with that said, I will make a motion to approve policy JF and attached form JLFE for adoption tonight as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? I guess the first question is whether people are comfortable with the plan to approve and then amend rather than to just wait a month.
I'm certainly comfortable doing that.
As am I.
Okay. Any suggested changes to the policy? Okay. All those in favor? All right. So now we have board schedule. So we have changed April 3rd to April 10th. We had mentioned that possibility by email, but we need, since our board dates are published, we need to take a vote to change that. So I'm going to make a motion to cancel the April 3rd meeting and schedule an April 10th board meeting. So it would be, nothing else changes, 6 p.m. in the Orono Town Council chambers. Is there a second to that motion?
I will second.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? I also wanted to make sure that everybody was on board with the April 7th. I believe we voted on this back in January. I didn't have time to look it up. Is everybody okay with the April 17th to April 24th change? Okay. I don't think we need to vote on that tonight, but I want to make sure everybody had that on their calendars and was on board. Looks like everybody's good. Okay. So we're into subcommittee reports. Policy Subcommittee. You saw our output from the last couple meetings. I think we're headed into that time of the year where we may have to start meeting twice a month. Talking to Meredith today, I think the top priority, we'll go ahead and probably address the JLF issues. If we can do those quickly, we'll at least spend some time on this at this next meeting. But the top priority is we really have to figure out what we're going to do on surveys. And we had kind of, we have deferred the board survey and we have the principal survey coming up. And we had kind of deferred, since they're, in some cases, actually written, the structure of the survey is written into policy. We had kind of deferred that to the policy subcommittee to make a proposal. So that's going to be the main topic a week from Thursday. If we have time, we'll also talk about having a rationalized hiring process across every category of hiring, but I suspect we may not get there. So that's what's up with policy subcommittee. UTC, there may be nothing to report.
Yeah, we're in the same boat that it's been canceled, so.
Yeah. Okay, Spruce?
Yeah, we had a meeting last week, Thursday, and we passed 5 budgets that had already been approved by the superintendents of the region, but that was the big heavy lift at the last meeting.
Great. Curriculum Subcommittee, I think we haven't met since the last report. Anything to announce for the upcoming one? We have another board meeting for the next one, so unless anybody wants to report.
And we were canceled because of the last one.
Right. And facilities. I don't think we've already met since we had the big public meeting. And at this point, I think some things are churning with PDT, and we're probably looking to have a facilities subcommittee meeting. We haven't talked about that, but probably fairly soon.
Yeah.
So no real update beyond that. Okay. Any other business? Any future agenda items? Any public comment? Okay. Date and time and location of next meetings is now corrected, April 10th, 2018, 6 p.m. here in the Orono Town Council chambers, 2 weeks from tonight. Also to point out, we have a meeting also here in the Town Council chambers at 6 p.m. Typically, that's only about an hour, and it's not mandatory for board members. Obviously, I think most of the Town Council showing up because it's probably before one of their Town Council meetings, but so it'd be nice to have as many board members.
Are we going to keep that, given that we just kind of kicked our meeting to the 10th? I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I really don't know. I don't think we're going to know what we're going to need to know to go into that meeting, to be perfectly honest with you.
I agree we're not going to know, but to be perfectly honest, we haven't known any of the other times we met with them in the past. You could, I don't know, I didn't ask Meredith to check into this, so we can't say. I'm going to guess the Town Council would prefer to go ahead with the meeting. Do you have a sense on that, Meredith?
I do not have a sense, because when we set this meeting, we really just followed the calendar from last year, so it really wasn't driven by any specific request. I agree the information is kind of limited at this point. I think my question would maybe be, what is it that we want to bring to the table to share, given if we have the meeting, where we are in the process. So I would say we could bring things like our revenue picture and how that's shaping up to be kind of a challenging part of our budget planning, and some of our deliberation around, our gap between our initial round of budgeting and revenues. I don't want to cause them to, have their hair set on fire with showing them the initial figures. So I guess, some guidance around what would be the right level of information.
Yeah, and I feel like my concern would be, we're hoping that a lot of the numbers that we don't have now would be in by then. So are those numbers going to get presented there before we get to actually see them?
No, I think
At
it'd be a
meeting
mistake to
here?
discuss anything there that we haven't discussed here, so.
I feel like that's
New,
very
nu-
tricky.
new numbers, no, so, excuse me, the admin proposals for whatever it is, 50, 100, 200, and 300 would not be brought there, that would be brought here. I agree, that's a firm principle that we should discuss new things here first. Last time, it was more about building bridges and trust than it was about actual numbers, because to be perfectly honest, we didn't have any better numbers last year than we have right now. We could ask Meredith to clarify the objectives, and based on that, we could give them feedback. If it's a trust-based objective, we could go ahead. If it's a budget update objective, we could suggest that it be postponed. Although realistically, I think they want some preview before they actually get the warrants, which doesn't leave us a lot of time to, especially with a week of spring break and some people probably out of town, doesn't leave us a lot of time to reschedule. I'm totally flexible in terms of what the board wants to do, but I don't think it's a given that if we don't have information, they would want to cancel, but it may be. Should we ask Meredith to clarify? And since this is a scheduling issue, I think we can go ahead and communicate by email about this, as long as it's publicly announced once we're done.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds like a plan.
I'll do that.
Any requests for information and follow-up? Okay, a motion to adjourn, is there a second?
I second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Okay,